Fury in India. Students see their state exam results scrapped because of a corruption scandal. Police are investigating leaks of exam papers affecting more than 3 million young people. So what's next for the students and the country's education system? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Years of study for more than 3 million students in India have come to nothing. It's not down to them failing exams, but because of a failure in the nation's exam system. You see, entrance exam papers for top courses such as medicine and PhDs have been leaked or sold. Exams that students had passed have now been declared invalid and will have to be retaken. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has fired the official in charge of the examinations agency, but it faces a major test of its own to restore confidence in the system. So how could this happen? And what's the impact on India and its young people? We'll speak with our guests in a few moments, but first, here's Laura Khan with the background.
Fury on the streets of New Delhi over an examination system in chaos. Students have been protesting since widespread cheating was reported in state exams, with papers being leaked in return for payment. With an unusually high number of people scoring top marks, the national testing agency that runs the system is being blamed.
We demand that there be an inquiry with the Supreme Court's intervention. The national testing agency must be disbanded and the ministry must be dissolved.
The exams affect students seeking entrance to state universities for medical school and PhD programs. They're furious that years of study, exam pressure and stress have effectively been made worthless.
We are asking the Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan, to take this money and return our future back to us.
And some students are taking legal action.
Students really don't know what to do, where to go. People have petitioned the highest court in this country, the Supreme Court in the country. The government is trying to say that we have formed an inquiry committee, but the inquiry committee's report will come within 2 months.
It's not India's first scandal over exams, but it's the biggest. Complaints have been lodged this year about corruption surrounding entrance exams for government jobs, with many applicants losing out to those with money and influence. The government says it's taking action. Prime Minister Narendra Modi sacked the agency's head, and some exams have been cancelled and several people arrested.
When it was clear that the test paper on the darknet matches the original paper, we decided that there should be a high-level Central Bureau of Investigation inquiry on the matter.
The scandal is putting pressure on Modi's newly formed government just after his BJP lost its outright majority in the general election that ended at the start of June. Many protesters and students are rallying with opposition parties, blaming an unfair system of control and corruption at a time when they're also angry about high youth unemployment and poverty.
The youngsters in India simply have no way through. And it's not just an educational crisis. It's a crisis in pretty much every sphere that we are facing.
Those hoping to advance their careers through education are left not knowing when their next exam will be, nor when the scandal will be resolved. Laura Khan for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Well, all of our guests are in New Delhi today, and Balaji is the former president of the Jawaharlal Nehru University Students' Union. Kiran Bhatty is a senior visiting fellow at the Centre for Policy Research, specialising in education policy. And Sravasti Dasgupta is a senior reporter at The Wire who focuses on politics, policy and governance. If I could start with Sravasti. So how could so many tests be potentially compromised so many times and at such a scale?
Well, that's really the question that's in front of the Modi government at present, Sami, because this is an unprecedented crisis that we are facing in India today, where national exams, which were earlier conducted on a similar scale for simultaneously for years, this time we are seeing that there's a complete failure on the part of the government in conducting these exams. And what people are tracing back to is the National Testing Agency, which was entrusted with the duty to conduct these exams back in 2018. Now, the chairperson of the National Testing Agency, according to a right to information data that has come out, a query that was submitted in the right to information query has revealed that the chairperson, he was appointed first to the Madhya Pradesh State Public Service Commission on the recommendation of the RSS, which is the ideological parent organization of the BJP. And subsequently, he has been appointed to several other Public Service Commission heads, including the Union Public Service Commission that oversees the bureaucrats that are conduct examinations for bureaucrats at a central level in India. Now, that head has not rolled even now, despite so many irregularities that have come out, not just in the NEET, which looks into the medical examinations, medical entrance examinations, but also the NET exam, which gives entrance exams to junior research fellowships as well as assistant professors. Now, the government has acted because, as we mentioned earlier, the fact is that the Modi government is short of an absolute majority. So it is on the back foot, just at the back of an election campaign where the opposition did rake up paper leaks as a massive issue. And the youth across the country, wherever we have gone reporting, everywhere the youth have said very clearly that paper leaks is a major issue. People in India, youth in India are dependent on government jobs because they look at it as a form of security, as a form of life, where a government job gives them a sense of lifelong security and pensions even after they retire. So paper leaks was a major issue during elections. Now after the elections, with the BJP being short of an absolute majority with 240 seats and having to rely on its allies to form the government.
Sravasti, if I may, we'll pick up in a moment on the question of how implicated the BJP and the RSS is on this. But before we go too further down that road of politics, I want to take a step back again and ask Kiran the question. Obviously, this is not, this problem of leaked papers, it doesn't look like the actions of just a rogue individual, given the numbers of times that this has happened and the scale. Who's behind it? How big and how powerful a network must be operating here?
It's hard to say, just because, the investigation is only just begun. But it obviously involves a large network of, not just people probably in the testing agency, but private touts and people also in education institutions. But I think the point that really needs to be highlighted here is that, over and above the corruption aspect, what this exam leak has highlighted is our larger concerns or challenges that the education system in India is clearly facing today. I mean, obviously, there is a huge mismatch between the supply of educational, positions or seats in colleges and the demand for them. I think in the higher education, there is a huge crunch, which clearly the numbers, as you said, more than nearly 3 million students competing for 110,000 seats. There's a huge amount of pressure that is on them. Also, as Sravasti hinted, because we have been experienced what has been called jobless growth, the demand for educational opportunities that are directly linked to jobs like medicine or engineering, or also government jobs like the police, etc., which are all of these are now under are being operated through centralized testing systems. There's a huge pressure on those systems, and they've given rise to opportunities for corruption, so to speak. Clearly, it also hints at big gaps in state capacity, so to speak, or in the governance architecture that is around these central testing agencies, which are partly responsible for the kinds of for this kind of situation. There is also the recent tendency towards greater centralization And the fact that a lot of these exams have come under a central testing agency, and there are a lot of questions raised which do arise about, how, what that has done to the autonomy of state level institutions, including state boards and state curricula, which and students from, smaller towns.
Those are important questions. Let me, if I may, bring in NSI Balaji into this. And the first question, there's lots of questions to ask you about, what this means for students and what they want. But before we get there, just give us the perspective of how easy it is for a student to get hold of leaked papers. Is this something of a very fringe problem, or is it quite common knowledge amongst students?
Well, you see what has happened in last 10 years from the time the present union government, the present BJP government has been in power. They have slowly been changing the way examinations have been held. The autonomous, decentralized way the examinations were held have been turned into a triple C formula, which I call it as centralization, control, leading to ultimate corruption. The NTA, National Testing Agency, which has turned out to be the national trauma agency for students in India, is the symptom of this new syndicate. Why do I call it as a syndicate? The answer to your question lies over there. Students today, when they give an examination, they don't know who is responsible if the paper goes wrong. There's no mechanism for accountability. There's no mechanism to know whether the exam process is transparent. There's no mechanism to hold someone responsible for an act, a criminal act like a paper leak, for corruption. That is the reason I called the whole system of NTA as a criminal syndicate. And this was built in 2018 to dismantle the earlier system, as our earlier panelists have
So practically speaking, Balaji, what does that mean for students? If you're going into an exam, does that make it easier for you to cheat if you want to?
No, it depends upon whether you have the money to buy that question paper, the networks. So what is surprising is one of the facts that has come out, in every case of paper leak, in every case of corruption that has emerged in the last 6 to 7 years, most of the times it is the people who are associated with the ruling party that have been getting caught. So there is some kind of syndicate that has been established, and people who are on know-how of that system are getting part of the system, because seats are less. The competition is more. If you have the money, if you have the resource, if you have the network, people are getting into the system. For example, if I can take a small example, multiple times situations have arisen that the question papers were leaked in a Telegram channel and they became viral. And this is just before the examination started. So the examination had to be cancelled after the examination was held. This happened in recruitment exams. This has happened in entrance examinations. This has happened in university examinations. And in a system that is rigged to this level, where students are having to face postponement and cancellation on a day-to-day basis, you can imagine the trauma that the students are facing.
Okay, Sravasti, the opposition, it sounds like we're going down the direction which the opposition have been talking about, that this is part of a bigger problem of government corruption. Is that the way you read the situation?
Well, I would say that it's a two-pronged problem. It's not just corruption. Definitely it is corruption, because as Balaji was just mentioning, I also spoke to several students after the paper leaks took place, after the examinations, the NET exam was cancelled, and they told me that they knew about the fact that the question papers were available in Telegram channels for students, and it was just about who has the money and the resources to pay for those papers and get access to it, and who doesn't. So these paper leaks have become so commonplace that it was a very, very big burning issue during the elections, and the opposition did manage to capitalize on it in crucial states like Uttar Pradesh and in Bihar. But apart from corruption, which the Modi government, of course, claims to have cracked down upon, and it tries to pitch itself as different from the earlier Congress-led UPA government, which was wrought with corruption scams, and therefore eventually saw its downfall and the rise of the BJP in 2014. So these paper leaks not only show the corruption that is there in the Modi government and its inability to tackle these problems, but also the fact that centralization is a major scheme that the BJP government has sought to bring in every form of government functioning, whether it is the conduct of examinations, whether it is the conduct of government business. Everything they're trying to make it a centralized structure where it's a top-down approach, and democracy and federalism is being trampled upon. And that is a charge that the opposition is making, and observers are also making, that it's not just corruption, but an effort to centralize everything is leading to problems of loss of democratization and autonomous.
Given what you said, if it's a problem of the systematic centralization of everything, can the authorities confidently say, as they are to people, we'll get to the bottom of this, we'll investigate this, when even some of the investigative bodies like the CBI, I mean, they themselves have been alleged to have been politically manipulated by the BJP?
Absolutely. And, the CBI used to be called the caged parrot during the UPA times. But now we have seen in the 10 years of the Modi government, not just the CBI, other central agencies like the Enforcement Directorate, which looks into economic offences, that has also become under the central government's rule, in the sense that it functions on the directives of the ruling party, in a sense that it cracks down on opposition leaders, and it gives a clean check to those opposition leaders who have joined the BJP during elections. So centralization is a huge problem in this regard, and democracy and federalism, the federal principle in Indian democracy, is under attack.
I want to go back to Balaji, if I can, and say, what is the bottom line here? What does this mean for students who've sat their exams and now they're learning that it's all cancelled? What's the bottom line for them? They lose time, they lose opportunity, they miss the year for enrollment?
There's only one word. It's called trauma. And also, when a student writes an examination, there is a hope that the examination is free and fair. By doing this, by failing the students, they are killing the hope the students have for the future. And one point that has to be understood, if there has to be a solution for this present problem, the NTA has to go.
Let me broaden the discussion out a little bit, though, and bring in Kiran and ask this question from a broader sociological perspective. What does this mean, particularly for students, people from disadvantaged communities? Because there's a lot at stake, particularly for them, right? They don't have access to the private education tests and systems.
Yeah, I mean, there are very clear implications for them, both in terms of, the opportunities available to them, and in terms of being able to access even these testing services, or, the testing centers. Like it was mentioned earlier, the centralization has in particular impacted a lot of students from marginalized communities, many of whom are, live in rural areas or in smaller towns. Because they go to schools that are perhaps run by state boards, and so their access to central board curricula are very limited. And if these central testing agencies are setting the tests, then they're likely to be setting them based on central school curricula. So already that's one layer of disadvantage they face. In addition, because these, there's a lot of cost involved in accessing these centers and taking these tests. But in addition to that, because of the huge amount of competition that the mismatch between demand and supply has created, we have the phenomena of the now infamous coaching centers, which are also, not easy to access for people of marginalized backgrounds. But coaching centers, for your viewers, are specialized centers which provide coaching for these standardized, centralized examinations, particularly for medicine and for engineering. They are held in particular cities, in several states of India. And not only are they extremely, pressurized environments, and recently there have been cases of, several suicides committed just in one of the centers, which has, made a lot of news based in Rajasthan, in the state of Rajasthan. Now, because these students are put under so much pressure to, study in a particular way in order to be able to compete in these highly competitive examinations, but they're also removed from regular schools to be part of these coaching centers. So it sort of really removes them from all the other benefits that an education system provides, and puts them under huge psychological as well as kind of pedagogical pressure.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Sravasti, given everything we've been saying so far then, how easy is the fix? Is it just a matter of reviewing some exams, seeing what was leaked, and just resitting those exams? Or does it sound like there's much bigger institutional factors at play here?
I think the situation has now come to a point where a complete overhaul is required, because we need an independent probe into what really has gone on, and the people who are alleged to have been involved, or all the people who are part of this agency. There is a deficit of public trust in the NTA, National Testing Agency, as well as the government. If the government is to restore the public's faith and trust in the agency and in the conduct of public service examinations that affect millions of students and people across the country, then an independent probe is the way to go, where the government has to ensure that the people who were involved are completely far removed from the probe process. Perhaps a probe by an independent judge could be the way out, but the government needs to explore ways to restore public faith and to ensure that the probe is conducted in an independent manner.
That's a good point. Let me take it to Balaji. What do the students want? Do you think they will see the investigative process that's been announced, this panel that's been put together from the NTA? Will they see that as the independent probe which our guests are talking about?
No, there's no independent probe. It's an illusion. And students are not happy with the method of investigation that's happening. As I said, students are demanding the resignation of the minister and also the UGC chairperson who are responsible for this mess. You know, there's one, I just want to bring up one fact. There's a solution to this problem. The solution lies in the way the examinations were being held pre-2018. That was a method that has diversity, that was a method that has decentralization, that had a method that had accountability, where education institutions would hold their own entrance examinations at university level. And at national level, you had competent bodies like Central Board of Secondary Education, for example, CBSE, that would hold UGC NET examination. And for medical and the engineering examination, the IITs and the medical colleges would take turns to host, to organize the entrance examinations at the large level, as a large scale. Now what has happened is you have taken away the academic autonomy and the academic competence that was there earlier to an incompetent, a completely non-academic bureaucratic body which has no powers in its capacity, which is registered under the Societies Act. We don't even know the terms of its existence.
Balaji, does that mean the students want the National Testing Agency ultimately to be disbanded?
Absolutely, without any fact. It has become a national trauma agency for the students.
All right, I can see Kiran wants to get in on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, it's absolutely correct what everybody is saying, that, there needs to be greater accountability. There needs to be, first of all, greater autonomy restored, which the earlier system had, etc. But I think somewhere let's not lose sight of the larger picture. I think what also needs to be done is that the education system in general needs a lot more reform. We have seen, especially since in the last decade or so, that the education budgets have come down dramatically. And so the supply-demand problem has just become much worse. As more and more people are seeking higher education, the opportunities or the seats available to them have really shrunk because investment in education has shrunk. So unless one addresses that huge mishmash, this idea of this huge competition and pressure for a limited number of seats is always going to create opportunities for corruption. I mean, you may bring in more accountability and try to bring that in, but there will be ways found to circumvent that in one way or the other. That's not the only solution to this problem that the exam leak has given. I think that the present government needs to start re-examining its policy on education in a larger sense and start looking at increasing investments in education, particularly higher education, because there the demand has gone up much more than the supply is able to provide. I mean, we are now talking about the massification of higher education because of this glut, in addition to the kind of thing that is there. So it's not just about, it is of course about transparency and attacking the corruption that this has highlighted, but it's also about looking at the larger issues that the system faces. So let's also bring in some focus on those things.
Okay, Balaji, I could see you were waving there. Let me give you a chance to come in on that.
I just wanted to add to what Kiran was saying. I absolutely agree that the whole point that right now is happening is because of seats. But you also have to understand the way the government has brought in the policy. Rather than increasing the seats in the public funded universities, which is accessible and affordable for the large population of the people, there is a great tendency towards commercialization and privatization, where you have private universities that have come in and where policies like reservation, which is social justice policy for elevating people who are the marginalized caste and gender and other people. Leaving that aside, we are pushing in high fees, loan-based education model in India, which is being funded through loans. It's a model that is being rejected in the West, that is being adopted in the East in a country like India. So even in places where there is expansion of seats that is happening, it is happening with the idea that education should be a model for profit, but not education not a model for access and affordability. This is something that we also have to accept. And unless and until this is addressed at a large level, you cannot go ahead and do, because majority of the population in India, even today, does not earn a significant wage that they can pay lakhs and lakhs of rupees of tuition fees to access higher education. Without social justice policies like reservation, it is impossible. That means the state support in public funded education has to increase. Rather, what is happening is the reversal of it is happening.
I can see, Kiran, you want... Oh, all right, let me give you a quick comeback on that, Kiran, before we have to bring in Sravasti. Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. I agree that's what I meant, that the government has to look at what it's doing in education. And in addition to centralization, that has been the recent policy, there's also been a much greater shift towards privatization. And I think that there needs to be a comeback from there, just as there needs to be a comeback towards more decentralization. It is absolutely true that more than 50% or almost 50% of the seats. So less privatization, more government investment in education, particularly higher education, is clearly the need of the hour.
Okay, so I think that side of the screen is in agreement. Let me take the question to Sravasti. The bigger picture here for the government, how much of a threat to the government is this wide disillusionment with the education system? It's not just down to exams, as we're hearing from our panelists on this show. It's down to other issues, whether it's the centralization, the privatization, the amount of funding for education.
I would say that since the BJP, it's just come out of an election, it has not won a majority on its own, 240 seats. It's still short of 32 seats of a full majority. So it has to tread cautiously. The opposition after election results has made it very clear that they're going to wait and watch. So how these protests really play out is very important for the BJP, especially how it handles it, because we have seen that protests have broken out across the country, not necessarily backed by political parties, but student bodies have been protesting. So the government has been forced to act. We have seen that the education minister came and addressed a press conference earlier when there used to be paper leaks in the previous Modi government. There used to be close to no response from the government side. And here we saw the Union Minister for Education coming and accepting responsibility, in a sense, saying that there has been an institutional failure. So the government is on the back foot. It needs to tread carefully, and it knows that it does not have a majority on its own, and therefore it is at danger at this point. It does not have the impunity that it had 5 years ago to roll through laws as they would have liked in Parliament, to do as they wish to. So the BJP government is going to tread a lot more carefully than it would have prior to these elections.
And we'll be watching as they do. Let's thank our guests, though, at this point. Ansai Balaji, Kiran Bhatty and Sravasti Dasgupta. And thank you too for watching. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, it's goodbye.